Working the night shift brings you up against all sorts of monsters, old and new. However, this one was rather different. I was dealing with a Class 5 spectral manifestation, the highest class that could appear in the flesh when it wanted to. No fangs or bloodlust, no claws or furry disguise, just a hole or emptiness where his head's supposed to be. No lock, gate, or door could have stopped him, for he was the personification of mortality, riding on unseen roads between the living and dead. Folk kept many names for him, but for this investigation, just as eerie as his appearance, I called him the Headless Horseman. Work hadn't been going good lately. Being a detective inspector dealing with supernatural cases meant my suspects were rarely put behind bars. I watched other inspectors bring in criminals in handcuffs, being applauded for their work. I felt stuck, like my rank of detective inspector would soon be snatched away for not doing enough. William from the Skinwalker investigation, now the sketch artist in our station, was busier than ever, especially with that night being All Hallows Eve. Miss Ada at the front desk, trying to keep herself awake, redirected a woman towards my desk. I stood up, placing my hand on my chest, neatening my black waistcoat over my white shirt, and gave a warm smile. Detective Inspector Fillian Hunt, at your service. How may I help you today, madam? I had asked. Despite my pale appearance, my demeanor usually calms people down, but she was incredibly anxious. Her hands were sweaty and she always rubbed them together. Her eyes were droopy behind those spectacles, but she forced them to stay open, like her eyelids weighed more than a ton. Then the woman introduced herself as Lola and took a seat. Lola was startled at the slightest of noises heard in the Redwater police station as well as outside, with heavy rain crashing against the window, with distant thunder rumbling in the sky, with a sound of a pencil sharpener at the end of the room. She was terrified at everything. She began telling me that her neighbor Mr. Granger died last year, and there was a long pause after that sentence, though I never interrupted. I wasn't going anywhere and Miss Lola could take all the time that she needed. But why was she telling me a story from a year ago? She repeated that sentence, then continued. Mr. Granger was a healthy man, strong as an ox, never got sick and never had any injuries. However, the night before he died, he became rather paranoid. He told them that a piece of paper traveled in the wind, burning at the edges despite the rain trying to douse it. The corners turned to crisp, blackened and torn, until the wind carried it past his window. When he walked outside to pick the note up and throw it into the bin, it had his name on it, written in blood. Next morning, when they all knocked on his door, nobody answered. Worried and concerned, they broke the door down, only to find him lying on the stairs, lifeless. He never fell, he never choked, and he wasn't poisoned according to the mortician. But he died that night. Whenever she said that sentence, it was always softer, emphasizing the paradoxical, confusing certainty to what happened. Lola told me that she, and maybe a few others, knew how Mr. Granger died, and it's because he whispered the old man's name. Now normally I would give folk a chance to speak, but I could see Miss Lola wasn't in the right state of mind. And if she skimmed through this incident, an important detail could be missed if I wasn't careful. Forgive me for interrupting, madam, but who is the he you are referring to? I had asked. Inspector, she said. Have you ever heard of the Dullahan? No, ma'am, I don't think I have. And so she explained. One dark, rainy night on All Hallows Eve in the quiet town of Shiverlow, the fog didn't roll or travel, it lingered, hovering if you will. Nothing helped it disperse that night, not even the heavy rains or strong winds. It was midnight, folk were asleep, and the town was silent enough to hear a pin drop. But some of them, like Miss Lola, heard the terror in the distance. She could hear a horse traveling against the wind, its hooves monstrous and thunderous, stamping against the dampened ground. This horse didn't neigh, snort, or lip flap. rather wailed in an eerie, high-pitched shriek. However, the sound of the carriage it pulled was in competition for the loudness of its noise. The large wooden wheels with uneven and irregular rhythmic knocks on the ground approached slowly. The air felt heavy and the night darker than before. Flashes of lightning followed by thunder cracks couldn't drown out the noise of this monstrous horse approaching. Lola heard a whoop slapping on the ground as it got closer, but not a whoop made of leather. It sounded firmer, stronger, like a hard object cracking the surface with every gallop. Lola moved her curtain ever so slightly, widening her eyes as the carriage entered the town. The horse wasn't normal. It was a nightmare mount, old and rotting with glowing red eyes that could pierce through a soul. But how did it even enter the town? The gate was closed. She couldn't decipher the noise coming from the carriage behind the horse, a crackling, rumbling sound like wooden balls rolling and smashing against each other. But then, she saw it. She saw the bones inside the carriage. Femurs, craniums, mandibles, sternums, clavicles, and a pelvis moving side to side. And if that wasn't frightening enough, she understood why the whoop sounded the way it did, because the whoop was made from a human spine. And then the dark horse finally reared and she caught a glimpse of the rider. A tall, slender figure wearing a dark black cloak and large boots tapping against the sides of the horse's body. However, when Lola followed the rider's body from toe to head, she gasped in horror and closed the curtain immediately, for the horseman's head was not part of his body, rather carried beneath his arm. This entire time, the rider never dismounted his horse, rather moved around the house back and forth, until he came to a dead stop. Then he whispered a name with a voice that sounded so frail, like he was gasping for air from his trachea being crushed. Mr. Granger. Lola watched Mr. Granger's soul trying to claw and grip onto the window that he floated out of, being pulled into the carriage like it was a magnet. And that was the end of it. Then the night fell silent, just the way it had been before the rider entered. When the horseman left the town of Shiverlow, the confirmation of the rider, his horse, or even the carriage being otherworldly was solidified. Shiverlow had a large gate, taller than any carriage, any horse, or even the largest werewolf. This gate was strong, reinforced with massive locks and chains. Nobody could enter or exit the town after 10 p.m. with the exception of emergencies. And yet, this headless horseman with his carriage of bones and a whip made of human spine dissipated into the gate, crossing it like it never existed as a barrier at all. I was rather confused. Redwater had many towns and villages, but why did the horseman choose Shiverlow? And why was Mr. Granger his victim? I asked Lola if there was anything Mr. Granger did last year. Maybe he knew the horseman, maybe there was animosity there. No, not at all, Lola answered. She said there was no rhyme or reason to the supernatural incident. This headless horseman targeted innocent people, and that he was a maniac causing havoc in Shiverlow, and that I should investigate rather than asking a million questions. How strange, I thought. She became so agitated when I asked her if Mr. Granger had done anything. I noticed how defensive she was to clear her town or herself of any wrongdoing. Miss Lola, I said, is there something you're not telling me? I knew when people lied or withheld information. I could hear Miss Lola's heartbeat racing, thumping against her ribcage like a drum being pounded. Miss Lola, I feel like something else happened for you to come here tonight, am I right? Lola burst into tears, breathing frantically as I fetched her a cup of water. It's okay, I said, take your time. I need you to be honest with me so I can help you and your town. She said before the rider left the town that night, the horseman's head being held beneath his arms had these smoldering red eyes and an evil smile that stretched his jaw so wide. She looked directly into those red eyes and time seemed to stand still. The rain had stopped for a split second, and the bones inside the carriage moved to the other side like they were making room for another passenger. Then the carriage door squeaked and opened ever so slowly. Now back at the station, Miss Lola, with her trembling hand, reached into her handbag and handed me a note of parchment burnt at the edges. "What do I do?" she cried out to me. "I heard him tonight. I heard him whispering." I looked at the parchment note and I understood the worry, despair, and sheer panic on the woman's face. Tonight was All Hallows Eve and he has returned. Lola's name was written on the parchment note in blood. Lola was the next victim, and the countdown to midnight had just begun. It was 9 p.m. when I reached the town of Shiverlow. Shiverlow was a small, dark, gloomy town located in a valley and looked quite spooky even for a vampire. The fog indeed hovered, like an uninvited visitor lingering for too long. The houses were small but cozy, with warm lights shining through the windows. There was a large gate made of solid steel at the entrance. Chains were wrapped around the locks, reinforcing it entirely. I looked around to see if anyone was nearby, then grabbed the gate and shook it with all the might that I could muster, trying to barge it open. Though it wouldn't have budged if they didn't open it for me. First thing off the checklist, Lola wasn't exaggerating. The horseman rode through the gate along with his carriage, and there was no other entrance in the town. The townsfolk of Shiverlow stood outside, watching me enter their home, so to speak. The men tipped their hats off and the woman curtsied as I took my own hat off out of respect. Normally, I would conduct my questioning outside, but the rain that night never subsided, not even for a minute. I entered a cozy tavern while they sat in front of me, but they kept the lights off. Only jack-o'-lanterns lighting up the room, being carried or kept on the tables by the townfolk. I had asked them about last year's Halloween, and while most of them were asleep when it happened, others told the same story Lola did. "Interesting," I said. When I asked them if any of them looked into the horseman's eyes, 10 people raised their hands. "Damn. Okay, did any of you get the parchment note with your names on it?" I had asked. They said no. Now the investigation became even harder. Fair enough, Lola did say there was no rhyme or reason to this, but why out of the 11 people, including Lola, did the horseman whisper her name? How did he even know it in the first place? Then I looked at Lola again and said, "Hey, you weren't wearing that a few hours ago." "Yeah," she replied. "I put it on just now while packing my bags to leave town." Lola had a gold chain across her neck as the cross sat on her chest. Contrary to popular belief, no, I will not burn if I touch it. She had been praying since she left the station, and I would be foolish to ask why. She said the gravedigger had given it to her as she pointed at him through the window. Well, it looked like I needed to have a chat with the gravedigger. But then at that moment, I heard strong, heavy hooves galloping in the distance. I heard the wailing neigh from the horse and the uneven rhythmic sounds from the wooden carriage wheels rolling on the ground. The Headless Horseman was approaching. Panic struck the tavern as the townsfolk scurried about frantically, but I stood up and yelled for everyone to stay calm. Lola sat in the corner trembling with fear. I reached my hand out to her and told her to come outside with me. The horseman will not cause any harm to her as long as she stood behind me. It seemed heroic in that moment, but truth be told, I had not the slightest clue on how to defeat this thing. All I knew is that if this Headless Horseman was indeed real as the townfolk claimed, I could get Lola to safety or even out of town with my vampiric speed before he could do anything. We walked outside and she remained behind me. There he was, standing at the entrance of the gate, but this time he wasn't holding his head beneath his arms. I could see black mist emanating from his spectral body and his nightmare mount having redder eyes than I did. He thrashed his whip on the ground, slap after slap after slap. I didn't have to wait long enough to see it for myself. The Headless Horseman rode through the gate like it wasn't even there. The townfolk gathered outside behind me, standing frozen with widened eyes, too scared to even breathe. I walked towards the gate and Lola, reluctant as ever, followed me. "Stay behind me," I whispered. "It's going to be okay." As weird as this may sound, despite the horseman not having a head, just emptiness or a hollow above his neck, I could still see his face, or at least I imagined it. I looked at him and said, "You're not welcome in this town. This woman has done nothing wrong. Shiverlow is under my protection. Be gone, you evil spirit." How strange, I thought. Did I really see a flicker of hesitance? Was the horseman really afraid of me? His horse tried moving forward, but he kept pulling the reins, halting it as it squealed. He could dissipate the way that he did through the gate, so why was he so still in that moment? Before the blink of an eye, his whip uncoiled in a heavy wind as he lashed it forward, cracking the air, heading straight towards my face as Lola screamed. Quite interesting, I said. No harm came to Lola, by the way. In fact, the whip did not strike anyone standing behind me, because the whip was right there in my fist, grabbed tightly. After a while, the townfolk realized that I had caught it. "A whip made of actual spine," I said out aloud. I didn't think it would be real. However, the wound on my hand caused by the whip wasn't healing. I could then see everything in red, which meant my corneas changed color, just the way they normally do when I'm preparing for a fight. Then the Headless Horseman spoke, as his voice traveled in the wind from the hollow above his neck. "Fillian, you are not marked for death, for yours has already been done. I do not seek a soul from a vampire." Crap, I told myself. I hoped the townfolk were so terrified that they didn't hear the vampire part. Maybe they did, maybe they did not, but thankfully nobody cared in that moment. How did the horseman know my name, or anyone's name for that matter, will always be an unsolved mystery. At that moment, Lola's handbag caught alight as she unzipped it, trying to take out the stuff from inside. It was the note that had her name on it that began burning to ashes, falling to the ground. The Headless Horseman looked at the gravedigger in the distance, standing near the churchyard. "You, Mr. Leslie." And then the rider, along with his carriage of bones and a nightmare horse, rode away through the gate of Shiverlow before disappearing into the night. And just as Lola experienced, the new parchment note blowing in the wind now had Mr. Leslie's name written on it, in blood. Though when I turned around to look at Mr. Leslie, the gravedigger, the 60-year-old man was not standing there anymore. He fled into the woods, exactly where I could hear the nightmarish horse galloping towards. The townsfolk were so focused on what I was looking at behind them. Before they turned around, I dashed so fast out of town that I probably seemed like I disappeared. I then caught up to Mr. Leslie in the woods, and he was terrified when I appeared in front of him. "What the hell are you?" he asked me, but I said there was no time. "What is really going on here, Mr. Leslie?" I had asked. The gravedigger knew something about the Headless Horseman, and not just from Mr. Granger's death last year. He gave Lola a gold chain with a cross on it, and I suspected the horseman's reluctance was linked to the chain itself. I just didn't know why. Maybe the cross on it had something to do with that. Mr. Leslie told me that I wasn't entirely wrong. It wasn't the cross that stopped the horseman though, but the gold itself. I stood with my arms folded, staring deep into the gravedigger's eyes. "You know who the Headless Horseman is, don't you?" Mr. Leslie replied, "My dear boy, not only do I know who he is, I was there when his head came off." All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, is a time where spirits roam freely. The idea of dressing up in spooky costumes was not a party trend, though it was done to fit in the crowd, just for an entirely different reason. When folk made themselves look scary, spirits never bothered them because they thought, like them, they were stuck in the veil. While most were frightened during this time, trying to repel spirits and prevent possession, others welcomed it. For in the town of Shiverlow, there was such a man named Horace Gunther. He had been a recluse, a miserly landowner who despised prayer, laughter, and every gentle sound that reminded him the world still had warmth left in it. Horace Gunther's house squatted at the edge of town, its dark windows nailed shut, its garden nothing more than dirt and bone dust. Rumor had it that he never slept at night. Some swore they saw candlelight flickering from his basement long after the bells tolled midnight. And when the church hymns echoed through Shiverlow's valley on Sundays, he'd hammer at his walls and curse so loud even the crows abandoned his roof. The man had been evil long before the horseman was ever born. But why did he hate prayer so much? On Halloween, most folk in Shiverlow could not afford material, face paint, disguises, or even a pumpkin to carve on the night. Therefore, they would pray. They would pray for hours on end, warding off any evil spirits that may enter the town or possess their children. This angered Horace Gunther, as he was inviting these spirits into town, wishing to make deals with them. This evil man performed rituals in his basement, hoping one of the spirits would accept his deal in exchange for immense wealth. Finally, on that same night, a very powerful evil spirit broke through the town of Shiverlow and entered Mr. Gunther's basement. Horace was willing to kill the townfolk, offering up their souls to this evil spirit as his end of the bargain. And so the spirit accepted the deal, damning his soul. However, a group of teenagers at the time, Mr. Leslie the gravedigger being one of them, had overheard the entire ordeal. So Leslie dug out a grave of the richest man that lived in Shiverlow, a man that asked for his treasures and wealth to be buried with him. When Horace rode in on his dark horse, Mr. Leslie called out to him, lying, that his wealth has arrived. Ecstatic and overjoyed, fully succumbed by greed, he rushed to the dugout grave to find a large chest of gold, not realizing that his deal would be broken without him fulfilling his end of the bargain. When Leslie and his friends stood by, hoping this evil man would take the gold and leave Shiverlow, the spirit of the man who owned the wealth rose from the soil on All Hallows Eve and shrieked at Horace. "Fool," the ghost whispered, "you dare touch another man's wealth?" Frightened and spooked, both Horace and his horse had fell into the grave. However, the impact of the horse falling on top of him was too much to handle, especially with his fall only being broken by the chest of gold in the grave, which ripped his head clean off. Mr. Leslie and his friends were terrified. They didn't expect it to end in this manner. They wanted to stop Horace, sure, but in a way that got him out of town, not to kill him. That incident was covered up and buried, just like Horace and his horse. Once I heard the story, I covered my face in sheer worry and defeat. "So the Headless Horseman is a fae," I said. Mr. Leslie asked, "What is a fae?" I told him it was a spirit, twisted by grief and hatred. Horace became a cursed soul through damnation. Faes are not demons in the biblical sense. Rather, they embody the same chaos and malice that demons do, but still obey the laws of the otherworld. Every night on All Hallows Eve, he returns to the town of Shiverlow, trying to fulfill his deal either for his soul to be free or for the delusion of his wealth waiting for him. However, it explained the encounter that I had with the Headless Horseman back in the town. He was never trying to attack me with the whip. Instead, he was trying to destroy the cross chain around Lola's neck. He hated prayer, but more importantly, he hated gold. It frightened him, just the way it did in his last moments before his death. There was indeed a rhyme and reason to who he was targeting on Halloween night. The Headless Horseman was going after all those who prayed in the town of Shiverlow. Then I asked the gravedigger if he could keep my secret. There was no way I would have been able to escort him back to town without using my full speed. "I do not wish to lie to you, Mr. Leslie. The horseman was correct. I am a vampire, but I am here to do good if you let me." Though the gravedigger was so distraught, I don't think he processed anything I told him. "Hold tight, Mr. Leslie," I said, and dashed forward, and within a few seconds we were back in Shiverlow. He fell to his knees and threw up, which was quite a normal thing to do considering an ordinary human traveling at vampiric speed. But then, I could hear the horse galloping against the wind. Therefore, with haste, I spoke to the townspeople. "Kind folk, gather all your gold jewelry, anything gold at all, even a mere coin will do. Hurry now, the horseman approaches." And so the townsfolk of Shiverlow heeded my request, frantically running into their homes retrieving any gold items they had. I told them what the plan was. They needed to remain hidden until I told them otherwise. And then, the Headless Horseman broke through the gates of Shiverlow. This time he was angrier than ever. No dissipation, no otherworldly supernatural black mists traveling with the wind. The malice he carried in his soul shattered the locks and chains, and he was riding straight towards me. It's been so long since I felt this way. I felt fear. Then I remembered I still had his whip made of human spine and used that against him. Whenever he tried to attack, I dodged and lashed the whip at him. It never wounded him, just struck right through his spectral body as his nightmarish horse gave a wailing neigh. "Fool," he whispered, "you cannot kill me." "I know," I replied. "I wasn't trying to. I just needed to lure him into an area of the town that would be easier for the townfolk, and then I yelled at them to do it." Then the people of Shiverlow emerged from the shadows and threw their gold possessions at the Headless Horseman. Gold chains wrapped around his neck and coins struck him like bullets. His spectral body could not deflect those gold items, no matter how small they were. Then the townsfolk began reciting their prayers. So softly they spoke, whispering under their breath. And yet, to the Headless Horseman, he felt his soul being blasted by their words. He wailed and shrieked just like his horse, as the wooden carriage in the distance burst into flames. His body moved unnaturally like he was being electrocuted. And then, chunks of his darkened soul began floating in the air. And so the Headless Horseman fled the town of Shiverlow, with fear and pain latched onto his soul, just the way it did before he fell into the grave all those years ago. But as he rode away, disappearing into the night, I realized that he wouldn't be killed so easily, but chased away for a very long time. However, whenever he does return, I will be waiting for him, for my crossbow arrows, now coated with melted gold, has his name on it. Then a group of people from Shiverlow had provided their statements at the Redwater police station, closing the case file. Before I returned home, I stopped at the local market stall to buy a bag of candy to leave outside for the folk that still may be trick-or-treating tonight. When I entered my kitchen, I poured myself a cup of blood and reflected on how I felt at the beginning of the night. I felt stuck, but why? Why did I associate that feeling with the lack of reward? Was my purpose so trivial that I needed something tangible to validate my work? What exactly was I basing my merit on in the first place? Why was I comparing myself to others? I wanted to make a difference in Redwater, a difference in the world, giving folk hope that while people like Horace Gunther may exist, there are others out there ready to fight for good. I thought about the greed Horace Gunther had and the gold he damned his soul for, but I felt pity for him, even in his death, for the realization of what he had done and how he died had still escaped his understanding. Being a vampire, the belief of immortality follows you, but that's not entirely true. Yes, I won't die from natural causes or severe wounds on my body, but a sharp object through my heart and I will cease to exist. And that still makes this undead life valuable to me. Progress can oftentimes feel slow. The road can feel steeper than most. But just as you develop the courage and strength to reach such a point, why would you give up when the path ahead seems uncertain? I never slept that morning. I realized, was the road actually steep or was I making it such? When I slowed down, took a deep breath in and walked the path rather than chasing it, it felt a lot better. Not easier, but better. Chasing and pursuing are two entirely different things, something that took me a very long time to grasp. I was so fixated on making a difference in the world that I wanted it to happen overnight. Then I remembered, it's cases like these that help me take the first step towards that, and that's what matters. For much like the Headless Horseman, we may be buried with our prized possessions, but we cannot leave with them. Instead, we will be remembered for how we lived. And I didn't want to be remembered for someone who was bitter, angry at the world, with hatred, malice, and jealousy in his heart. I wanted to be remembered with all the noise, distractions, and comparisons in this world, as someone who tried to do good with the time that he had left.